What's going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. It is the week of Sealy Outdoors Big Bass Splash, the biggest tournament of the year for the weekend angler, and really everybody other than us guides. We can't fish it, but all of you can, and many of you will. And so today, I want to give you guys a full breakdown, in-depth instruction. I'll tell you everything I know about the best bait on Lake Fork right now. So what is the best bait on Lake Fork right now? I mean, there's a couple of them, a few of them that are working really good leading up to this Sealy Outdoors event. But probably the best one, the one I think will give you guys the best chance to cash a check this weekend, is going to be the drop shot. Now, this is not your normal drop shot. This isn't what you've seen Aaron Martins throw back in the day in those finesse clear water situations. This is a smallmouth style drop shot. In fact, this is the rod I'm throwing it on. It ain't no spinning pole, folks. It's a little different style drop shot. You might call it a Lake Fork drop shot, a Texas drop shot. Some people call it a Bubba shot. It is a little oversized, but it's still, for around here, a relatively smaller profile bait. It's certainly a finesse type of presentation for this lake here. And it catches a lot of numbers of fish, even when the bite is tough, which right now, guys, as you get here, the bite is kind of tough. We've talked about it ad nauseum here lately. The lake has come up over 2 feet a couple weeks ago in a single day. That really pushed a lot of fish shallow. The water temps are really starting to cool down. The mornings are really getting a lot cooler as we head up towards this tournament. All those things, cooling water temps, rising water, that's all going to push fish shallow. And when fish first come shallow to the bank and they've been out offshore throughout the summer, they really scatter out. And it's not that the fish aren't biting. When you get a fish to bite right now, it bites good. It eats the bait good. It's a hard bite. It's not like a turnover situation where the fish just hardly bite the bait at all. When you get a fish to bite, he does bite well. But it is hard work finding them. They're spread out. They're in random areas at times, but man, they just are one at a time for the most part, unless you get in the perfect key little areas. With them being spread out, you really need to maximize the percentage of fish that you get to bite. One of the best ways to do that is to slow way down and pick up a drop shot. So today I'm going to tell you guys everything I know about how to catch fish on a drop shot here at Lake Fork during the summer to fall transition. All right, so the first thing that we're going to need to know about how to fish this drop shot is what equipment are we going to need. So let's start off with the terminal tackle right away. Hey, even though it's a drop shot, I'm still using an extra wide gap style hook. That right there is a 2/0 Gamakatsu off shank worm EWG. It's just an extra wide gap regular wire hook. It's not, they have one called a super line. Don't get that one. That's a heavy gauge, a thicker wire. You don't want that one. Just get that regular 2/0 EWG style hook from Gamakatsu. And then these drop shot weights, which I'll show you one right here, and I'll show you this when I rig it up on my line here in a minute. But that little slot on the top of that weight makes things a lot simpler for you. 1/4 ounce to 3/8 ounce is usually the size weight that I use. They sell weights in this style almost everywhere you go. These are just the ones they have for sale at Lake Fork Marina, but it doesn't have to be this particular brand. And then the bait that I'm using is a Grande Bass Rattlesnake is the name of this bait that I like to use. Now, as you can see, it's a short bait. It's not a long bait. It's only about 4.5 inches long, but it's got this big ribbed body right here. But if you look inside that rib, it's got, as I stretch it out, you can see it's got a thinner core. And what that does is that thinner core gives that worm a lot of movement, a lot of flow in the water with very little water pressure. Even when you're holding it still, that worm's still trimming a little bit behind that drop shot hook. And those ribs help it catch water, which also helps add action with that thinner core. Just a tremendous bait. We've never really talked about on this channel until now, but it's a bait that I've thrown for years and years and years out here. When I throw a drop shot, that is my favorite drop shot bait on Lake Fork. And that's what I mean. It's not your typical drop shot. It's not a tiny little finesse worm, even though it's short like one. It's not those little tiny goby looking things they use up in smallmouth country. It's a little thicker, heavier, bigger profile bait. But you know, the reality, guys, is we have dirtier water here at Lake Fork. You know, it's not dirty, but it's stained compared to places you would typically throw a finesse drop shot. We've also got heavy cover. So you need a bait that you can fish on a bigger hook, on a little bit bigger line, because even though you're finesse fishing, you got to be able to have some kind of control over these fish as you can see evidence of behind me. Like if you hook an 8-pound or 9-pound over in that junk and you've got it on 6 or 8-pound test and a little drop shot hook, the odds of you landing that fish are almost none. I mean, it's almost no chance you're going to land that fish on that setup in that kind of cover. So you got to fish a little bit bigger baits. And fortunately for us, with the dirtier water and the type of bait that fish eat in this lake, even in a finesse presentation, they'll eat a big bait. Relatively speaking, everything's relative. All right, let's talk about rod, reel, and line. A rod, I like a 6'9" medium action rod. This is actually a 7.2 medium. You guys, some of you guys know I've been working on some new rods. This is one I'm just playing around with to see what all different techniques I can do on it with this 7.2 medium. But the rod that I'm actually going to use for drop shot that I'm designing is a 6'9" or 6'11", I can't remember. But it's a medium action rod under 7 foot long. On line, I like to use 15-pound fluorocarbon through and through. On a reel, I like a high-speed gear ratio reel. This is a 7.5-to-1 loose hyper mag that I'm using here. Show you guys how we rig this drop shot up real quick. So rigging a drop shot up is going to be really simple. I'm going to take the hook and point it up. I'm going to run my main line through that hook. Then I'm going to go back through the same eye of the hook. I'm going to tie a simple polymer knot, guys. A polymer knot's really simple. You just tie an overhand knot. Once your line's doubled up, you tie an overhand knot. You take that loop that comes out on this end. You put your hook through said loop. Moisten it up so it doesn't burn the line. And then we just tighten it down. Now, one thing that I like to do right here is, you see my hook can be pointed up if the knot sits just right, but sometimes it'll turn. See how the hook's turning kind of sideways on me right there? So what I like to do is I'll actually take my tag in and go back through the eye of the hook, pointing down with the hook facing up, lines coming out through the downside, and then turn that knot into the eye of the hook. Now you can see, if you get real close there, my knot, my polymer knot's actually going down and sitting in the eye of my hook right there. That's going to do a couple things. It's going to keep that hook straight vertical. See that? Now when my bait sits on there, it's going to sit doing, and my hook's pointing straight up. And when I set the hook, I'm going to hook him in the top of the mouth more often than not. What it also does, it helps protect the knot a little bit, putting it in the eye of the hook whenever you're rubbing it on brush or anything else. Now we're going to take our 1/4 ounce weight. And here's what's cool about these weights. They have this little slot on here, and I hope that shows up on camera. But that little slot right there makes it super easy. I only use about a 6-inch tag in on this weight on my drop shot. So we'll go about right there. And you just grab both ends of that line and slide up. That's all you got to do. And now your line is stuck in there. You can literally fish it just like that. So we'll take and cut that tag in down, leave about 1 inch or so hanging off of that. And that's my drop shot rig. Now, that does a couple things. It saves me time not having to tie a knot and all that good stuff. But the other thing is, if just my weight gets hung up, I'll lose my weight, but I won't have to retie my line. I won't break my hook off and all that. You know, if you tie a knot around a weight and you get it hung up, there's a chance that your line breaks above the hook whenever you get hung up. If that happens, then you got to retie the whole rig. Right now, if this breaks off, I just grab another weight, slide it in there, and I'm back in the water in less than a minute. So really kind of a key feature, and the reason I like those weights that have that little slot that you can just slide your weight up into. All right, rigging the worm. We're going to rig it Texposed, weedless. Show you what I mean by that. We're going to go through on this rattlesnake, that little first knot in the head. That's all I'm going to go through. So I'm going to take the hook in and go right out underneath that little knob on the head. That's going to allow it to sit up on the top of this EWG hook perfectly. As you can see there, it sits right in that little groove perfectly right up here at the top of the hook. And it doesn't overpower my line and scrunch my line up. It doesn't scrunch the head of the bait up. It just fits perfectly like that. Then I'm going to kind of measure where my hook would naturally lay. I'm going to go in right there and go straight through the entire worm, come out on the top side, bunch it up and skin hook it just like so. Now I've got my worm rigged perfectly straight. I'm ready to go. You see how much that worm shakes when I just have a little vibration in the line? Now you can imagine if that tail's free, how much that tail's doing this in the water. That's why this bait is so great. So there is all the gear that you need to know for this drop shot. Before we get up and show you guys how to fish it, talk a little bit about areas that we're fishing it in right now. It's transitions. Right here where I'm sitting right now, if you'll turn the camera to our left, you'll see that the main lake is right out there. I mean, that is the whole big arm of the west side of the main daggum lake. I'm not too far from being straight across from Lake Fork Marina right now, actually. But what I have here is you come into the mouth of this pocket, the mouth of this cove out here on the main lake, where our boat is sitting, we're power poled down, it's real shallow. But right here on the edge of this timber, there's a pretty significant and sharp drop off. And that's the kind of things that I've been catching the most fish on, is get towards the mouth or the first half of a creek or cove and find those steeper dropping banks, steeper dropping slopes that have some good cover on it. This is one that does, got all this timber here, and it just coincides right perfectly with that sharp slope. That is the type of areas, these steeper sloping banks, especially if that slope comes all the way into a terminal bank. That's even better. I've got an area around the corner from here I've been fishing that's set up just like that. It's actually been probably my most productive area here lately. But that's the type of area you want to look for. Transition areas, creek channel swings, basically just steep sloping banks, drop-offs that coincide to the mouth of a pocket or creek arm, where these fish, as they come from offshore and they're moving into this pocket and getting shallow, they have somewhere where it'll kind of signal them to stop and set up right here. They've got an easy transition from deep to shallow water, and they can set up and feed there for a little while as they start to make their way on back, because they're not grouped up, but an area like this might gather 4 or 5 of them for you, and that's a whole lot better than catching one every hour. If you can get 2 or 3 or 4 in an hour, obviously that's going to be a lot better. Hey guys, if you want some help locating fish for the Sealy Outdoors Big Bass Splash, and you didn't have the time or maybe didn't have the money to go out on a guide trip like many of the guys do that fish that event, hey, you can go check out the Fish Life app and look at the Lake Fork Premium Package. We just updated those spots last week, and there is a ton of spots on there. They're exactly like what we've described to you today. These sharp sloping areas, transition stop signs that are holding the fish right now. So if you guys want help finding those fish for Sealy Outdoors Big Bass Splash, go check out the Fish Life app, subscribe to the Lake Fork Premium Package, and go catch more and bigger fish. Okay guys, going to show you how I'm fishing this bait. You know, 2 things that are key to this. One is getting it as close to cover as you can. You want to be tight to this timber, or if you're around a dock or a lay down, you want to have your bait really right in there in the middle of it, as tight as you can. But the other thing is the slowness. I mean, the pace that you have to fish this bait at is so slow for it to really achieve its best results, for you to get the most bites you can. It's unbelievable how slow. I know yesterday when I was with my customers, we finally just almost sat dead still for a while. The wind had quit blowing for a second. It had been blowing. Finally, the wind quit blowing enough for us to sit kind of dead still for a minute, and we got a couple bites and caught a couple fish. And I looked at those guys and I go, you see how slow you have to fish? I mean, you almost have to sit dead still and just methodically fish every piece of cover in an area. So we're gonna make, you can make an overhand cast, a sidearm cast, however you want to, just get the bait there. But I'm gonna try and make a little cast here and get this bait right beside this timber that's right in front of me. So you guys can see I went just on the left side, and that bait almost even wrapped around. I'm getting as tight as I can to those 2 pieces of standing timber right there. Let that bait fall all the way to the bottom, and now I'm simply going to drag as slow as I can stand to drag. As you guys can see, I'm not imparting any action on the bait. I know a lot of guys do like to kind of shake a drop shot, and I don't have a problem if you want to mix in that every once in a while. But for the most part, you want that drop shot to be dead still. What you don't realize is that your hand, everybody's hand, has a little bit of a vibration to it, right? And that will transmit down to that line. And those little thin cord grande bass rattlesnake worms, or any other type of drop shot worm that's like a little thin straight tail worm, you'll have enough vibration, that bait will be subtly trimmering. As it's just sitting there doing that, that's a lot of times when I'm just sitting here like this, it'll go boom, that's when you get your bite. When I'm sitting literally dead still and I think I'm doing nothing, I'm dead sticking the bait pretty much, that's when you get a bite. So I'm just gonna slowly creep this bait by this timber. And I want you guys to notice, I know I'm talking to y'all, but I want you guys to notice and be aware of how long it's taking me to get this bait past that timber. Okay, this is how long it should take for you to fish past those 2 pieces of wood right there that are that close together, right? All right, so I'm past them, I'll come on in, we'll turn and go this way a little bit, we'll go over here to this next big piece of timber on over here, and I'll show you guys one more time. We'll throw it on out there, throw it past it, see how through past that piece of wood right there by about 4 or 5 feet, let it go all the way to the bottom. You can tell how much it just now hit the bottom. You can tell how much it slopes off right there, how quick it slopes off. I'm power poled down in 2 foot of water behind me, and out there my bait just fell. It's like 8 or 10 foot right there. So now I'm gonna come up to that tree and just pay attention to how slow I'm fishing this bait. Because that is, other than being accurate to your targets and getting tight to cover, the most important part is how slow you fish this bait. Kind of down in the roots of this tree, feeling a little rough stuff. coming through all that junk down there. But notice again how slow I'm fishing the bait. Now, if I get a bite right here, now I'm just on this side of that tree, I would fish it just a little bit longer, than I would come on in. If I get a bite on a drop shot, one thing about a drop shot, you got a pretty good size hook in there. You got a medium action rod. Like, you could probably set the hook as hard as you wanted to, but you don't really need to. A lot of times I'm just making shorter casts to targets, and really all I need for a hook set is if I get a bite, boom, I'm gonna drop my rod, reel up my slack, and just give it a snap like that right there. You don't have to have the big dramatic step back yeah, like you do on a jig and things like that when it's way out away from the boat offshore, or even like the big shaky heads that you guys saw fishing this summer. It's just a, get a bite, drop your rod, really slack up, just a little snap pop like that, and you should have a pretty good hook set. The deal is the wire on these 2/0 hooks is a lot thinner, so you just don't have to hit them near as hard to get that hook to penetrate through bone or anything else in their head that you might come into. All right, guys, there's how you fish a drop shot. I noticed earlier I didn't mention colors. This is a black and blue one. I've been throwing this a lot because we got some stained water, and we had some cloudy days last week, and I started throwing it. I just kind of kept throwing it. But personally, if it's going to be sunny, which it's forecasted to be during the Big Bass Splash, I would recommend getting yourself a watermelon seed, watermelon red, watermelon candy, watermelon, just about anything that you personally prefer would probably be the better color to go with on these rattlesnakes. But this drop shot, that's been the most effective bait here over the last week or two at Lake Fork. I know you guys are going to catch a lot of checks on a drop shot at the Sealy Outdoors Big Bass Splash, so hopefully some of these tips will help you catch more doing that, and we'll see you next time right here on your Lake Fork Guide. What's going on? You might be the prettiest camera woman in the history of bass fishing.
You were just talking mess.
But you are the biggest pain in the butt camera person in the history of bass fishing, Princess.